Welcome to the University of North Carolina webinar, Remote Offices, Virtual Teams, and the Future of Work, Through and Beyond COVID-19, sponsored by the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise. I'm David Hofmann, Senior Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and the Hugh L. McCall Distinguished Professor of Organizational Behavior at the University of North Carolina, and I will be your host for this afternoon's session. Let me introduce our two speakers, our two panelists, and then we'll jump right in. First, DeLisa Alexander serves as the Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer of RedHat, leading the organization responsible for global human resources, including RedHat University. The organization's mission is to be a strategic partner to the business in acquiring, developing, and retaining talent, and to enhance the RedHat culture and talent brand. During DeLisa's tenure, RedHat has grown from 1,100 employees to over 14,000 associates and has been recognized as one of the best places to work in multiple publications around the globe. And many of these workers do work remotely. So she has a lot of expertise to share with us this afternoon. Our second panelist is Arvind Malhotra, the Alan Andrew Professor of Entrepreneurial Education and Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at UNC's Kenan-Flagler Business School. Arvind's area of research focuses on crafting innovation problems, open innovation approaches, crowd creativity, crowdsourcing for innovation, using crowds to solve complex societal problems, and the future of work. His book, Unleashing the Crowd, Collaborative Solutions to Wicked Business and Societal Problems, was published in 2019 and focuses on how organizations can leverage crowds for solving wicked business and societal problems, one of which we are experiencing right now. So maybe we should just switch to crowdsourcing COVID-19 and we change the topic of today's webinar. But let me open with a question for DeLisa. As a leader at a company that has significant experience with remote work, for a number of your employees, what are the top best practices that you've put in place on a large scale that you could share with other organizations, maybe who have just transitioned into this over the last month?
Sure, I'd be happy to share. I thought first a little context might be helpful for people who aren't as familiar with RedHat. We have offices in 60 countries. And in some of our countries, our workforce has been working from home now for 6 weeks or more. And we're fortunate that we have a pretty good experience base of working remotely, as about 25% of our workforce historically has been considered to be remote. So we had a basis to draw from, but the rapid decision that we had to make, that we sent everyone to work from home, was certainly unprecedented and pushed us to change quickly as well. Things like, normal processes like, new hire orientation and our whole onboarding system, very office-based around the globe. We had to move that to virtual really rapidly. Development experiences. We do have a lot of online learning available, but our signature experiences were definitely classroom experiences. In fact, we have 2 premier programs internally for accelerated leadership development, and there are cohorts that form, and we have experiential learning throughout the entire program, but there's 2 really big conferences that are important in terms of demonstrating skills. Those are being reimagined to be virtual. And our RedHat Summit. So this is our huge user conference, which was scheduled for 2 weeks from now in San Francisco. We've moved that completely to virtual. And so we're all learning on the fly how to do everything virtually, where we felt like we were pretty good at it before. And we realized we had a long way to go to become really completely virtual. But it's been interesting. And also, because we have a really inclusive and collaborative culture, we have always encouraged teams to work in a way that honors the person who's not in the room, that honors that remote person on the phone, right? But it's really helping us to become expert at inclusive team dynamics that we talk about because no longer is anyone in the room together, right? So it puts us in a totally different world. In terms of crisis support, we've accelerated our maturity there as well. We have now formed a cross-functional, cross-global team that is looking at security and risk and immigration issues, and then dealing with our people and helping to support them through all their various issues across the globe. The group meets daily, and we as executives meet daily with the group to understand what the immediate needs are, immediate crisis, and immediate decisions. And today we actually canceled the meeting for the first time because today nothing happened that couldn't be handled by email. So that was the first day. So that was a relief. We got an extra hour back to ourselves. And then what we've been doing to support that is a couple of big learnings there. One is we do have people on the ground in every region, in every country, to support others, right? And getting the right balance of the global team that supports security and risk, and being able to hear what's happening on the ground, in the field, with all the changing regulations around the globe. Getting that right balance was very difficult so that people could move fast, but also have centralized instruction. And so we made definitely some mistakes and had some learnings from those mistakes. Of course, I don't know if anyone could have kept up with the global nature of the catastrophe, but we definitely learned something from that. We have had a cadence of communications. This is the most important thing with our people. And so we developed a Mojo, an internet site where everything that is COVID related, you can find one-stop shopping there with all the updates. In addition, we've got as needed communications from our Isaac alert system that's more local. And then we have about a weekly all hands where we invite all associates to join, and we'll do a session in the morning for America and EMEA, and then in the evening for APAC, and let people just put their questions in, vote them up, and then we hit that most asked for questions, and there's also an agenda that really hits the points we want to make sure people are aware of. So that has proven to be a great best practice, and we try to be completely transparent and have adult conversations, but at the same time, really be supportive. And our people are very concerned about one another. They're concerned about, is everyone able to get their hours in? They're concerned about our customers. They want to know how we're helping RedHat customers, especially in sectors that are supportive of COVID relief. And we have a lot of customers that are in those infrastructure, community infrastructure organizations. And so we got to make sure they're staying up and they're running and that we're helping them. So people are very concerned about that. We have, pharmaceuticals, and are we helping them to stay up so they can work on therapies, et cetera. And then they also want to know if we're taking care of each other. So all of that is a lot to balance. And in terms of supporting remote workers, which is maybe what, the main point of the question is, we're fortunate. Everyone's already equipped with a laptop unless they're a new hire. Now that's been interesting to try to get laptops to new hires. And like in India, where everyone shut down, you can't get a laptop to a new hire. So they're having to work on their own phones, and that's the only thing they have, sometimes for a few weeks, which, it takes a lot of perseverance to be working in these conditions. And so I guess with that, I would say we've asked everyone to work with their managers if they don't have some equipment that they really, really need to get their job done. But overall, we were already equipped for remote working, and so it hasn't been a main focus for us. But it certainly is something we have to accommodate if there's an issue. So those are some of the highlights of what we've put into action to try to support our people.
Okay, Art, let me turn to you and ask you. I know you've done research on virtual teams, and any top best practices for virtual teams, and then kind of a second question, which is how do you maintain an organizational culture sort of once you go virtual?
Great, thanks, Dave. You mentioned that I work with crowds, but actually it goes way back in early 90s when I started looking at, this has been in the making for almost 50 years. I started looking at telecommuting after OPEC, oil crisis, and when individuals stopped commuting because of oil crisis. And then 9/11, I had a huge NSF grant. So I've built from individual to teams to larger crowds. But I think you asked a central question, which is what's one best practice? And DeLisa actually touched on it, was you can't communicate enough, right? So very often people say over communicate, and that has a negative connotation to it, but you cannot communicate enough, which doesn't translate to, which you've heard me say that, it doesn't translate to 100 emails a day, but as rightfully at Red Hat, there's a central repository of communication that's updated frequently. So that's one way. The other way is to synchronize through Zoom or whatever technology you're using, but be very prudent about it. So that would be one emphasis, is you cannot communicate enough, I think, if I can say it any other way. And then I think the second question was, how do you maintain a culture, right? I'd love to hear Delisa's view on Red Hat, but having studied over 100 companies, I think the way I think of that is in three ways, which is, especially if the whole organization is now virtual, is simplify, magnify, and amplify. Simplify is basically, you have to now boil down to why you exist as a business. Magnify is, if you're a senior executives, including C-suite, you have to put a spotlight on it and exhibit the same culture over and over and over again to the point of being overly repetitious. And amplify is that once it's emulated and exhibited by senior executives, middle-level managers amplify it by doing it themselves, and it goes down the chain. If it's in a hierarchical organization, or even if it's a flat organization, it's repeated by all team leaders as often as it can be. So simplify, magnify, and amplify.
DeLisa, any thoughts on culture, maintaining culture with remote work?
Yes, definitely. And I love Arv's simplify, magnify, amplify. Yes. I think that's what it was. Yeah, that is a great rubric. I'm gonna steal that. With regard to what we've been thinking about, first of all, it's interesting, particularly because we've been challenging ourselves to maintain our culture through years and years and years of kind of rapid growth and bringing in a lot of people that aren't from the open source development world. So that's always been a constant challenge for us and a lot of focus for us. So now we're saying, okay, now on top of that, let's try to do this where we can't be together physically. And so it's definitely, again, top of mind. How do we do this? And so one thing that we've been thinking about is, why do people come to Red Hat and why do they stay in terms of the culture? It's the people. That's the number one reason people stay. It's because of the people and the mission that we're working on together. So making sure that we figure out how people can maintain a sense of connection is critically important, along with a sense of well-being. And so what we found is that Red Hatters started immediately sharing across our airwaves ways that people can stay connected to one another and support one another. So speaking of your crowdsourcing concept, this is not something that the people team came up with. People just started, sharing their ideas and sharing funny things they were doing to navigate the challenges. For about 2 weeks, there was a daily post about surviving homeschooling your children while working and what the lessons were learned. So people were just sharing that. So from that, we created we're in this together, a well-being and remote associate support newsletter that's going out every week, where we're amplifying the ideas that others have come up with. So we make sure that everyone has the opportunity to copy those ideas and then to add to them. And so that's one thing. And then we also, another big important part of our culture is we have a culture of giving. It's really important. People are so proud when we're able to give to other organizations to support causes, because open source in of itself is, it's a good, the public good. So people are very much focused on that. So we have a team, the Red Hat Cares team. And so they are the folks that do a kind of collect our corporate social responsibility activities and amplify them. And so we've created a central way for everyone to share what we're all doing and what Red Hat is doing and what other opportunities there are to give back. And so that's been, I think, very, very important for people to feel like they know what's going on. They know how they can get an hour or 2 hours. Yeah. And finally, the other really important part of the support structure is our managers. Our people managers cannot do enough to stay connected with their folks. But they're people too, and so they have this added pressure of trying to think about productivity and also the well-being of their people. So in addition to our We're in This Together well-being and associate support newsletter, we also have a manager support newsletter each week where we provide inspiration and advice and best practice on how to manage, and we're calling it managing in turbulent times. And we're having rotating authors across the globe so that you're hearing from different people, because we're all going in through this together. And interestingly, our head of sales for APAC was the author for this week. And we have a manager's list. And you would not believe the number of people who responded back to that gentleman saying, I am so proud that I'm on your team. I recommit, I re-sign up. You were inspiration to me for caring enough to send this note to us to help us be able to get through this. So those are some of the things we've been thinking about in terms of supporting the culture.
That's great. Are there any, and this is to both of you, either of you, are there any like hidden costs that either it's cost savings or additional cost in terms of support that you see when you move to remote that I think a lot of people think, oh, well, it's, you just move remote and it picks things up. Are there any sort of support? I know you've talked about some of the support, but from a cost perspective, anything hidden that people might be being surprised by right now as they've navigated this in their own organizations?
I'll let DeLisa take it first. And then...
Sure. The first thing I think is, how do you have the right tools from an equipment perspective, but also from a bandwidth perspective and from like a VPN perspective. So we were so fortunate, our IT organization immediately upped our VPN bandwidth so that we're not having any issues with that. But I imagine that this is not something that every company is ready to deal with. And then I thought a lot about the savings, quite honestly, on the flip side. So as a technology company, I think our number one savings has to be snacks. Snacks and drinks. We're not giving an allowance for that. Other people are asking for that. Seriously, travel. What a huge cost saving. So, we are definitely thinking about how we reinvest in that and our big events. Those big events, certainly there's some costs associated with that, but totally different. So it hasn't been for us a huge hit, thank goodness.
Yeah. So so when you move remote, it's a BYOS, bring your own snacks. Arvind, any thoughts about that, or then I'll move on to our next question?
I'll go both ways, like DeLisa. I think one of the couple of hidden costs, I think. One is, I don't think of them as dollars, but one is cost of technological disruption, right? So not everybody will come up to speed at the same time. So there's a workflow disruption which has to be accounted for. And one way to do that is DeLisa mentioned it clearly, instead of waiting for the laptop to show up at your door, can you continue the work process through a mobile phone? And that was a great example. So that's one cost. The other hidden cost is what I call psychological cost of work-life imbalance. And I think I've seen some really good companies keep those boundaries very clear where, just because you're hanging out as the team leader till 9 p.m. doesn't mean that others have to leave their kids and hang out till 9 p.m. So that's a cost. From savings perspective, I think I remember working with a very huge financial services company that said we couldn't afford to have these offices in New York. So there's a huge real estate cost saving from this, which doesn't have to be done the way building expensive campuses to bring everybody together. So there's that. I think DeLisa nailed it. I think there's so much saving around this, which is HVAC savings for that. If you're not running this in the office, you don't have real estate costs associated. There's so many ripple effects on those costs. But I think those are trivial as compared to the psychological costs and cost of workflow disruption.
Okay, great. I will say for those that are, for the 150 people that are watching us live, there is a Q&A button down there. We've gotten a couple of questions rolling in, and so we'll get to those. I'm going to try to get to those here in a few minutes. So if you've got questions or you want to vote the question out, do that. Let's go to what activities are companies finding that you think can be done better remotely? So were there things, DeLisa, in Red Hat that when you went remote or when you started a division remote that you found out there were some activities that could be done better remotely than in person? And then maybe, Arvind, in your experience, are there things that when companies transition to this, they actually feel that some things work better remotely than in person? And I wondered if we could get any examples of that, if any come to mind.
So you want me to go first? So,
sure.
So this is really interesting. You know, I think Art brought up a really good point about productivity and whether we will take productivity hits. And I'll tell you, I think that the number one thing that our people are worried about themselves is, am I being productive enough? Should I be taking a day of paid time off because I had to take care of my kids in the afternoon or in the morning, or my wife and I are balancing, or my mother is ill and I need to take care of her? So the most questions we have received really have been around, can I be productive at home? So what I think the situation is showing is that if you give people the right amount of flexibility, they certainly can be productive at home. I know that this doesn't apply to every industry and every role, but in roles that are more office-oriented roles where you're using computers to communicate and collaborate all day, every day, I think we're learning that, yes, remote work can be incredibly productive. And I also think that the people who work in offices typically, who think those people who work from home are slacking, are realizing that actually everyone's working a lot harder. And so it's hard to work from home. It's hard to ever shut off. So the productivity, you know, I think you'll find a way to get the work done, and the flexibility allows for that. So those are a couple of things that have been on my mind.
Arp, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think this study, NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research study, just came out. It's a pretty massive scale economic study which said 1/3 of the jobs can be done from home. And I thought that was a severe underestimate of what could be done from home. I think if you put me on the line, I would say 2/3 of the jobs can be done at home, and all industries. And it's not just a high tech that gets more productive, like DeLisa is saying. I think finance, corporate management, professional services. So if you ask me, what kind of work can you do better? I'd say one, routine work where it's data-driven upkeep maintenance. You get this bandwidth that you never thought you had, right? Even if you have your kids running around, if you balance this all well, you have the routine work balance. But I think more importantly, which, you know, having done 2 decades of NSF research on this, I think creative and thinking work gets way better, especially because the reflective movements are, you know, you're not fighting a daily fire, you're not being constantly disrupted. So there's a flow of creativity and thinking that's required without disruption. And I think, you know, I've shown it a number of times that virtual environments, if done right, are actually better for the higher end human work. And I think DeLisa nailed it for me. It's collaboration can, if done right, be much better. And I want to use productive for that because I'd say effective. I think if you have the cadence, as to borrow DeLisa's term, the cadence of collaboration, if maintained, you know, having studied this for over a decade, it's a much better, much more effective environment for collaboration.
Okay, so my next question actually dovetails really nicely with a question that was submitted by one of our participants. And I think I'll ask their question because their question is better than my question. My question was, how can managers support their employees, and how does a leader's job shift when working remotely? And their question was as follows. I think one challenge that gets amplified with remote work is managing staff, and how managers can keep a pulse on staff members' productivity while maintaining work-life balance, picking up on some of the other thoughts, and homeschooling needs. Do our experts have any specific tips or thoughts on how managers can best manage remotely, particularly those that are now doing it for the first time as of 2 weeks ago? Sort of balancing and maintaining productivity while also being flexible with people's personal needs, because this is actually an unusual time for working remotely, because a lot of DeLisa, your employees that work remotely full time would have kids in school and whatever, and elder care and all that stuff is taken care of, and now all of that stuff is now in their office, so to speak. So let's try to get real specific. Any specific tips for new managers who've switched into a remote work environment, and how do they make that balance of maintaining accountability and productivity while providing flexibility and emotional support for their employees?
I'll start.
Yeah.
So the first thing is a really specific tip is to make sure your internet is fast enough. Can't tell you how frustrating it is to try to lead an organization or lead a team or have a one-on-one conversation if you're going in and out. And definitely that's very, very practical. Beyond that, I think the most important thing to do is to help managers make it safe to be able to have a conversation with their team members about what's really going on in their household and what support they need and what flexibility they need to be able to get the work done. And if they're not able to get the work done, to make it safe to say so, and to make it safe to say, as a team, we together are responsible for this project, for this deliverable. So let's talk about how do we balance this out as a team, and how do we have predictable time off for all team members so that everyone can take care of those extra things that need to be taken care of in order to be able to turn and focus on that work. And a lot of people are not comfortable with that situation, but it really helps to de-risk the entire thing if you're making it safe for the conversation so you can together figure out how you're going to get it done. And then if there really is a productivity issue, there really is an impediment to getting the work done, then to escalate in a safe way, to look to your next level leader to say, okay, we've tried to work through this as a team and come up with a solution. We have an issue. As quickly as possible, make it safe to do that so that then the organization can help to figure out what that solution is. So that's what we've been really harping on over and over and over with our teams. Make it safe, make it safe, make it safe. Let's all just be honest. This is not the way we're used to working. We're going to have to do this together to be effective.
Our thoughts?
Yeah, so, having studied 250 leaders plus, I think one of the big ones is, and these are not my own words, but one really prominent leader who everybody loved virtually, she said to me, walking the virtual hallways, she said, I didn't have this practice in physical offices to walk up to someone and say, how are you doing? What's your work, your life looking like? How are you managing your kids? So I love what DeLisa said, you have to make them feel. So I asked her, how much time do you spend on this activity, walking this virtual hallway, one-on-one check-ins? And she said, I have 10 team members, so 1 hour each, twice a week. So calculate all of this. Almost most of her work week was shared with this. And so I was like, how do you end up doing your own work? And she said, the other thing what I've learned, and I heard this over and over, is it's a very delegational environment, right? So volunteerism that DeLisa said, somebody's falling behind, this spirit of volunteerism comes in, but it's also delegational, that I don't have to do all of this stuff. If I'm a leader, I'm a member, I can share. And if I'm a leader, I can share my own responsibilities. Doesn't make me less of a leader, but for me, what becomes important is understanding people's personal need. And the third thing is, the whole promise of this now, if we are to learn something, is it's a temporal autonomy, right? To use a more complex word. I don't have to synchronize your work rhythm with mine, right? There is the cadence, as DeLisa says, but it can be asynchronous, right? So you have kids right now, and they go to sleep, you might pick up the slack. It doesn't mean that I have to give it to you by 4 or 5. The 9 to 5 concept, is alien, right? So it's, in many ways, it's an autonomy of time. You have to let people use their cadence and then synchronize the cadence amongst all, which doesn't mean completely synchronized. 9 to 5 are all working. So those would be the 3 big ones as a leader. You have to set the psychologically safe environment where you say you can have your own cadence, your own temporal autonomy. And, this is where flex work really has to be flexed. It cannot be synchronized work. It has to be flex work.
Okay, I'm going to go to a couple of questions from our participants. Here's one that came in. A little bit more of a macro question. Do you think that the outbreak could forever change the way corporate America views remote work? And this person says, I'm particularly curious about changing the culture in very traditional workplaces with a quote unquote butts in seats leaders who equate productivity with being present in an office. So what are your thoughts on to what extent this is a disruptive change that sort of forever alters, or at least for the next period of years, alters the nature of work?
So I'll go first, and DeLisa can give me RedHat's view on that one and her own view. Having studied 3 ways, I think the OPIC, as like I said, created a lot of individuals who'd work from home, but they all went back to the offices at some point. And the simple feeling was that if I wasn't in the physical office, I'd be considered as an outsider. And so I'd fall behind in my evaluations. And so that drove people back. And so I waited, it was always my interest. And so I started looking at virtual teams from innovation perspective, going specifically in late 90s. And then I wanted to study other companies, and they said, we don't work virtually. Why would we do that? And then came 9/11, and I did see a shift. I'd say a quarter of companies started to say, well, we have to at least operationally understand how do we maintain productivity. So I think this to me is as big as any other wave. And what's the beautiful part is the thing that bothers us the most is having our kids at home is teaching us, this is stretching our capabilities to the nth degree possible, right? So I don't see how you could return. Having done the stretch, it's going to look very easy when the kids are back to school, and we could have the flexibility of going over to the office, but also exercise the flexibility of not going and doing our work. So I think that rhythm, to me, it didn't stretch as much from 9/11 as it has stretched now. And I see this capability serving us to shift over to a lot more remote work.
I totally agree. I think that this is stretching us, and we're developing new capabilities, new competencies. And with those new competencies and also the trust of one another that, hey, we get through this together, I can now trust that my people are able to self-select when they need to do their work and to be able to keep up with deadlines. I think that that's a competency, that building that trust as well. And then we're all learning how to use technology more effectively as well. So me, for example, I have a legal background, so I love paper. I have to print out everything. And I do a lot of communications work. So I'm constantly, marking up documents and giving it to my team. And not anymore. The paper is done. I have developed a new competence of editing right online within Google Documents. We're all editing together. I'm no longer freaked out by that. So I think that this is forcing us to develop capabilities that will help us to accelerate that disruptive change that Arvind mentioned. And I just don't see it going back. And I think the other piece of it is, I think it's a society. I think we're going to have some potentially different values and also concerns. I think that we simply will not want to go all be together in a place where we're physically having little space to ourselves for long periods of time by choice. I really see people looking at that whole idea of being together in a different way, and I don't think that we'll want to use our facilities in the same ways as we did in the past. But I think we're going to want to use our technology in our home offices a lot more.
Yeah. So let me do a quick follow-up, because one of our attendees specifically asked, and maybe this puts you on too much on the hot seat, DeLisa, but it says, do you think shared office or open office plans will become less popular as a function of this contagion, thinking about what you just said, where people might just stop to work at home?
Top of mind for us is thinking about reentry across the globe. How are we going to effectively have the workforce come back to our offices and have them, in some countries, for example, there are going to be rules around protective devices and space in between desks. and perhaps even, what type of equipment needs to be in between desks.
And that, you think that will be going like permanent changes in those countries?
To be able to re-enter
Yeah.
some regulations that we're going to have to adhere to, which will change the way their offices are staffed, where the workforce goes into the. And then I think that we will find that people have preferences for a little more elbow room, a little more less intimacy. And so I think we all need to be thinking about that, because I don't think the world goes back to exactly the way it was.
I think also, there's enough already building momentum saying open spaces are not very conducive for productivity or creative work, for that matter. People need the space, right? So this has just accelerated the need for social space as well as professional space to some extent.
Let's see. I'm scanning our questions here. Here's one that just came in. Sort of, we might be facing a future situation with intermittent periods of distancing and remote work, where we're back in the office, and then this virus or another one similar to that comes in, and we're remote for a couple of weeks, and then we're back in the office. Or even partial returns to an office environment for some individuals based on health condition. Any thoughts on how those kind of hybrid working challenges might manifest in the coming months?
I think that we are scenario planning with that. We've been hearing some people believe that the pandemic will be a W.
Yep.
The curve just flattening and then decreasing. And so I think we all need to be thinking about that. And luckily, we're going to have developed some expertise in how to manage through these situations. And I think that the big message that we've been giving, and I think most companies, is that the health and well-being of our people is the most important priority. And so it'll be easy for us, I think, to go, well, this is a situation where we know where we're going to err, and it's on the side of taking care of our people and having people have more opportunity to stay well.
And we were already, from an educational point, we were already thinking of the hybrid model where, but the paradox is that we thought we'd all come together intermittently for socialization. And DeLisa clearly pointed out that we're going to be pretty wary about doing that, right? What's the gain loss from this, right? Not just work productivity loss, but also social loss. So I'm not sure what that cadence would look like, but I think hybrid might be waiting for real great moments of peace and harmony and not having anything in the air. But we'll question, I think. We'll question both from a personal viewpoint, what's the point in going there? And from a work viewpoint, what do we really gain from having gone there? So that'll be great.
So, DeLisa, I'm going to pick up part of a question from one of our attendees. I mean, you're in charge of the entire human capital organization and career progressions for people at Red Hat. And their question is, what are the implications for career growth as a telecommuter, where they may not have been seen in role, sort of in value-added impact versus more typical face-to-face interaction? So how do you think about, from a career growth, making sure that somebody who's telecommuting or working remotely has all the same opportunities as somebody who's in the office every day, who has a lot more informal interactions and maybe opportunities to network with people?
Well, I think that we've had a chance to think about this because we do have such a large workforce that's remote already. And so I'll give you an example. One of our biggest award that we give out to associates in the entire year is called our Chairman's Award. And it's a peer nominated award. And each year, about half of the winners are remotees. So it tells me that at Red Hat, remotees are highly valued. And the reason that they're able to be remote is because they're adding so much value. And so they get that flexibility. So I think that it bodes well. But there are also roles where, and team cultures that are much more, I would say, traditional And so the question will be whether or not the leaders, the managers, the decision makers of this particular teams create that competency themselves where they learn how to assess people by what they're doing and the value they're adding versus by the number of hours that they're being seen. So in meritocracy, Red Hat strives to be an inclusive meritocracy. We value the idea that the best ideas come no matter title, tenure, location, organizational structure. It's all about the value. And so I think it actually helps us to all bring meritocracy to life and to develop the skills of assessment that go well beyond, hey, I ran into you a few times and I had a great time chatting with you.
Yeah. So picking up on that one, a question for Arv, coming in from one of our attendees. They said, I appreciated Arv's example of walking the virtual hallways, which makes me wonder about how networking will change. As I enter the workforce as a fresh MBA grad, I'm concerned about my networking opportunities. Any tips on how to network? Kind of picks up on this career progression question on how to network in a virtual environment, especially for new hires.
Yeah, LinkedIn is going to be your friend, next best friend. I think we've been telling our MBAs for a while, and I myself, so I'll give you an example. If I was supposed to go to Estonia and Russia, take a bunch of students, and it's knowing how to do LinkedIn forensics. Well, who's my second link? Who's my third link? Can I get introduced? It's just transferring. Actually, it's much more effective because I'd have to pick up 100 phones to get there. LinkedIn gives me, less than Kevin Bacon degrees of separation. Within 3 degrees of separation, I'm talking to a founder of Bolt, which competes against Uber, and he says, yeah, well, you're welcome to come visit us in Estonia. So I think that's going to be really imperative as to, I'm not an advocate of LinkedIn, nor do I own any shares there, but I think the LinkedIn mentality is going to be forever. And it doesn't just have to be LinkedIn. You'd have to kind of do your own personal networks virtually and see how you tunnel in. But, I've seen numerous studies on LinkedIn and connectivity, professional connectivity through LinkedIn and how effective that can be.
I'll just add that for organizations, we're going to have to be more purposeful about how we help people to make connections. So for example, we have an intern program starting in May. We held a session with all the interns, this is in the US, this week. And we talked to them about what the program was going to look like and that we were going to launch it completely virtual. And we did something we'd never done before, which is we signed each of the interns a buddy so that they have someone that's their go-to person, their friend, that they might have created that friendship in new hire orientation, but instead we're kind of helping that to form. Then there's going to be much more around mentorship across the company as well. And I think that the other place we're seeing this is just generally for new hires, now that we're doing everything virtually, the way that the teams are connecting with those new hires to support them with their onboarding, it's very interesting. In the past, it was really easy to say, well, I don't really have to worry about my new hire. They're going to be starting and going to new hire orientation the first couple of days. So about Wednesday, I'll connect with them. And about by that point, the week's halfway over, right? No. Now it's really incumbent upon the team to connect in right away with the new hire. The new hire orientation is only covering what is absolutely required. Everything else is going to be handled by the team. And so it's going to create that team dynamic where they're interdependent much more rapidly. So I think that's an interesting outcome.
Okay, let me switch topics here for a little bit. Thinking about how might performance evaluations evolve, and this captures a couple of questions in our Q&A box. How might performance evaluations evolve, and how do you communicate more sensitive conversations that are often done better in person? Virtually, so like a coaching meeting or one of those difficult conversations where you've got to say, hey, when you said this in that meeting, that's got you in trouble with HR. How are you thinking about some of those meetings virtually?
So I think I'll capitalize on what DeLisa said. Was this mindset shift from process measurement to outcome measurement becomes really key. That's one thing over 2 decades I've noticed, is how soon you as a leader or executives in a company can shift from this process view of I am working to outcome view of I have worked and here's my output to you. And so what DeLisa said about recognition is really key, right? So that's very outcome-based measure, and doesn't say if you're in the office or outside. If it's an outcome-based measure, it's equally relevant to anyone. So that's really going to be very key shift in your mindset as you move forward with it. And I think, sorry, DeLisa, please. I think, there's this whole theory of media richness which said video or face-to-face is better than phone, which is better than email. And I can tell you, email is worst of them all. But there's enough research to show that the audio component of audio-video is way more critical than the video. We overestimate the requirement for video, and we forget that we send some cues that are really very poor in meetings. Blinking your eyes and shrugging your shoulders. So audio is pretty good for these sensitive conversations. They have enough richness to the tonal. We're very good as humans with tonal intonations to communicate what we need to without having off-putting video cues out there. So, DeLisa, sorry.
No, I think that that's spot on. And I think that while we're starting to focus initially on, is everyone safe? Do you have the equipment that you need to work? Now the question is, are you able to, as a team, get your work done, right? And so there are going to be situations where someone is not able to be productive, and that conversation is more about their ability to do the work versus the stress of working from home. And so that's where that personal interaction is so critical. And I think that, we've learned that it's really harder to have that interaction when it's not face-to-face, but face-to-face by video, and I guess phone to face by video. Okay, it's all right. It's definitely not email. Email doesn't work, but as long as you're having that interaction in a one-on-one setting where you can give feedback and make sure, I think the most important is to make sure that the person who's getting the feedback is in a place where they're able to hear the feedback. They've got a quiet moment. They're not being distracted by kids and dogs, mailmen, the plumber, whatever. They can actually sit down and focus and understand that we're about to have a conversation that where I'm standing for your success by giving you the feedback you need to let you know right now you're not being successful. And if you stand in the place of wanting that person to be successful and only giving them the feedback for the purpose of their success, then that will help that person to be able to hear it. And if they're motivated to seek assistance in making that change they need to make to be productive and to be able to be the value they want to be.
Okay, I'm going to try to get in 3 more questions in our time left. I have one really specific one, and then one sort of macro sociological one, and then I've got a concluding question from my list. Let's start with a specific one. Security concerns around virtual meetings and events, and how do you address these security concerns?
DeLisa, I'll let you take that one first. Yeah.
So we have actually heard from our IT organization that cybersecurity needs to be top of mind right now. There are a lot of additional phishing attacks that are happening, a lot of fraud that's happening. And I heard today from some of our banking colleagues that be really careful. If someone thinks that they're an expert or claims to be an expert on something or claims that they can bring you to the front of the line with a payment of some type, it's not true. There is no way to pay to be in the front of the line right now. So yes, any types of activities that you can do to help your people be more aware that there is an increased risk right now, and that there are bad actors that are trying to take advantage of this, and that they need to make sure they're doing their updates, right? Updating their systems. They're paying attention to what the IT organization is telling them. And then any additional support you can offer to them, because some people simply are not confident in how to make those updates to make it safe again, to say, hey, I need help to be able to make this update. I think those things will go a long way.
Okay, Arvind, I'm going to kick the sociological question for you, because I know that you've done work in knowledge work. You've also done research on the gig economy, and so a question comes in from one of our folks around: is it the case that the move to telecommuting, remote work, etc., that we're experiencing right now will accelerate a socioeconomic divide where knowledge jobs become, quote unquote, immune from disruptive events, while, quote unquote, manual labor jobs are hit really, really hard?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So one is, by keeping knowledge workers at home, we are practicing the requisite social distance 101. But I also think frontline, right? So I don't see this as a digital divide. It can potentially be if you don't recognize that people we didn't recognize, such as grocery store workers, are frontline employees. So I can see the effort from a political standpoint of recognizing them as frontline employees, not just the medical personnel. So yeah, I think the bigger question is, if knowledge work was done remotely as far as possible, and creative work, then what would happen to the jobs that are associated with physical real estate work, right? So that is a more worrisome question than the other non-knowledge work, which I still think is very crucial frontline work. Anything in customer contact work has taken on a whole new significance before that. But it's the hidden manual work that is going to be an issue. Much of it is associated with real estate. And for that matter, I think you've asked me about Uber and I think Lyft drivers. So gig work, this is the time to think about universal basic income. I've always advocated for it. I think it's so much of the workforce has now become the freelance economy labor workforce. And that's either way, right? It could be Uber, and it could be someone designing a logo for your company. So I don't see it as a division between creative and non-creative work, or knowledge or non-knowledge work, but it's what's your level of exposure to disruptive events, and what is your economic safety net? That's going to be more important.
DeLisa, thoughts on that?
Yes, I've heard it's a little different divide than the traditional divide. So it's retail, it's hospitality, it's travel. These are the industries that are really taking a hit, and a lot of those have a wide variety of resources that typically support those organizations. So I'm not sure it's the knowledge worker versus a not knowledge worker. That said, I totally agree with Arv. I think it's coming into contact with people and what risk you're willing to take. And perhaps we will actually end up paying people in those roles a higher wage because they are doing a service that less people are going to be willing to do. So that'll be interesting. But I think that the digital divide, where the biggest risk is that I see from my perspective, is in schools. I think about our high school kids. I think about, the elementary school kids. A lot of kids don't have access to the right equipment. And so, in Wake County schools, our kids are out. They've been out for several weeks. They were thinking about going to, I think, pass-fail grading. Today, I was talking to people from NC State. I also was talking to people from UNC. We didn't talk about this point. But will those grades, pass-fail grades, be acceptable to be admitted to the finest universities? These are all things that are long-term impacts for our society. So that's where I really worry. And I think that institutions that can focus on how we close those gaps will do a really good service to the economy for the long run.
Okay, we've got about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get one question in, and then you can kind of wrap up any final tips or words of advice to our attendees based on the session. Kind of maybe the one thing that you would have them keep in mind at the end of your answer to this question. But the question is, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the world right now in terms of, I just got switched to remote work. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know if I'm going to get COVID-19. I don't know if one of my family members is going to get it. But now many of us now are sort of a 1 degree of separation from somebody who's had it, and maybe 2 degrees of separation from somebody who's passed away from it. And that creates a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And so in that context, what are the messages that you think employees need to hear and that managers need to try to provide? And then any final thoughts at the end of that answer?
DeLisa, please.
So this is just absolutely spot on, top of mind for us. We've been thinking about how we can proactively support our people in a different way. If you think about supporting someone through a family member who passes away, and that being a very traumatic event that you may have dealt with in your organization. Well, now it's a situation where it's from a pandemic that everyone is susceptible to. So the level of anxiety is certainly heightened, and the need to be able to have an approach to supporting people through these crises, or this crisis, I think it takes on a much more important role. And so for us, we started thinking about how can we really be proactive and thinking before this hits, how do we support our people? And so there's a book that we're referring to, and I'll share it with you all. And again, I don't have any stock in this, but it's called After the Shock. It's by a former chaplain for hospice named Becky Sansbury. And she created a methodology, a framework for how you think about supporting people through shock. And it was the only book that I was aware of like this. So I asked my team to review it and to be thinking about how we can create a framework for supporting managers and teams as they go through this journey. And I think it'll be so different than anything we've experienced because of how afraid and anxious people are about their own families and their own situations.
Arv?
Yeah, so I'll use that as my final word. I think capitalizing on what DeLisa said, I think this is the time, if you're a leader or a manager, we've talked about emotional intelligence for a long, long time, but I think its time is now to have the emotional intelligence to learn, sympathize, and to put people's fears at rest. I think this is the time to build the emotional intelligence to the extreme level that you can.
All right. Well, we're going to give people like a minute and a half back of their life. But DeLisa, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and providing your experience, wisdom, and insights based on your career at RedHat. And Arv, thank you for joining us and providing your wisdom and insights and experience from your 20 plus years of research in this area and in these topics. And thank you for those who attended for joining us live for this event. This webinar is sponsored by the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise. And we will be recording this, and those that signed up and registered will be getting an email with a link to the recording, and feel free to forward that on to any colleagues if you think it might be helpful. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you soon.